Welcome to Heartbreak Revealed. Discover real stories of wives, betrayals, and shocking twists. Hit subscribe button and let's get to our story. My name is Sam, and I come from a broken family. I was raised by a domineering mother and her controlling sisters. Karen was the oldest and 14 years my senior. Michelle was 11 years older. I guess I was a mistake and not planned, and they all blame my birth for my parents' separation. My dad left home in 1983 when I was 5 and never returned. Throughout my childhood, I was bullied both at school and at home. I just wanted my mother to love me, just a pat on the back and tell me that I belonged. It never happened. I was good at studies, and after trying for years, I dedicated myself to my education. Years passed, and in 1996, I found myself at Midtown University in Boston. I was more than happy to be away from my house. Here I met Sophie, and even now I can picture her from back then. She was beautiful and so confident. On the other hand, I was shy and introverted. She was in her final year of a creative writing degree, and I was finishing my master's in mechanical engineering and design. Like I said, I was too shy to approach her, and she was never short of attention from men. She was 56 with blonde hair and big green eyes, the type you could get lost in. She had a nice body, but I knew she was out of my league. The guys who chased her were all outgoing and popular. To my surprise, one of her friends got talking to me at a party, and Sophie came over and joined us. I had little experience with women, and I think being humble and bashful made me attractive to her. I managed to build up the courage to ask her out, and we began dating. I'm not ashamed to say that she took my virginity, but after around 8 months of dating, I heard a rumor that she had been screwing around with other guys. I had no way to prove it and was afraid to confront her. Sophie was a spoiled child. Her parents spoiled her and her sister Jessica. Most of our relationship, I had to put up with her acting like a princess. If she did not get her way, she would create a fuss, and she wouldn't hesitate in creating problems in public, which just caused me embarrassment. My friends couldn't stand her and thought I should get rid of her. But I fell in love, and I had never really experienced that before. When we graduated, we both found jobs and managed to find a flat outside of Boston. Her family was from there, and I had long since stopped having anything to do with mine. We were married a year later, and the following year we welcomed Emily to the world, shortly followed by Olivia a couple of years later. Sophie loved being a mother, and everything between us seemed great from then on. I got promoted a few times, and then 12 years ago, I started working for Wilson Engineering. The increased salary and bonuses helped us to save for a better house. But like most people in the world, 2008 was a bad year. The economic downturn meant that many people lost their jobs. Contracts were harder to win, so we all had to up our game and work longer hours for no extra money. It was at this time, when both the girls were full-time at school, that I realized Sophie was having an affair with some guy from our old university. I was so focused on work that by the time it ended, I was none the wiser about who he was. My best friend Jake thought it was a guy in her class who had moved nearby. I confronted her once about it, and she just laughed in my face and told me to stop being stupid. But I could tell she was lying. The fact that I was able to keep my job and the good salary meant I was in a great position to buy a nice house. Sophie was always on at me to own a house that befitted our status, whatever that meant. But I conceded, as I always did, and we managed to buy a beautiful detached 4-bed house in Boston. It was a buyer's market at the time, so we got a good price, even though the mortgage was a little steep. One thing I did do that was out of character was to open a new savings account in my name only. I only put my endo-fear bonus in it, and with me being the sole breadwinner and the one responsible for all the finances and banking, I don't think Sophie would have known about it, even if I waved the receipts under her nose. In retrospect, this turned out to be one of the best things I could have done. I needed some protection because I was not sure if Sophie planned on dumping me if the old lover ever returned. After the time, everything seemed to go back to a semblance of normality, and the girls were always a top priority for me. I encouraged them in education and made sure I spent plenty of time with them on weekends. In fact, it was me who took them to dance classes, concerts, and the zoo on more occasions than I can remember. Sophie always seemed too busy on her coffee outings with her other spoiled and lazy friends. I rarely socialized with the other husbands, but we seemed to be henpecked and under the thumb to varying degrees. My friends used to sing Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones to me when I had to cancel plans in favor of whatever Sophie wanted to do. Even at work, the guys on the factory floor would make comments about my marital situation, especially Sophie's control over me. It was only a few months ago that it all came to a head. Olivia had just left for university, and for the first time in 18 years, Sophie and I were alone. Both the girls were attending our old alma mater, and as I finished unpacking Olivia's belongings into the apartment she would be sharing with her sister, she turned to me and asked why I was even with their mother. I was gobsmacked, as she was always such a quiet girl like her old dad. "I heard she's screwing around with Ben from your company," she said. I can remember the tears in her eyes even now as she spoke. It was news to me, but I was not surprised. All these years I could have investigated her affairs and never did, for fear of breaking up the family and my girls suffering for it, and resenting me like my sisters did my dad. I allowed her to cuckold me because the alternative did not bear thinking about. I still loved her, but I loved what we had created even more. This news did a number of things to me. Firstly, I realized for the first time the level of animosity felt by my girls towards their mother was far greater than I could ever have imagined. They loved and respected me, but I knew they were disappointed I hadn't taken a tougher stance with Sophie. Secondly, it brought up old feelings I felt towards the women in my life whilst growing up, and how that contributed to my weaknesses. Finally, I realized at work I was being talked about and laughed at openly by the staff, and most noticeably by Ben, who just happened to be the nephew of the owner and the man cuckolding me. I did not know what to do, but I knew I couldn't go on allowing this, especially now my youngest daughter was aware of the ridicule I was receiving at the hands of Sophie. I knew I had to confront her. My heart was racing as I was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for Sophie to return home. When she finally appeared, I found I was unable to speak. Again, she just looked at me in a way I can only describe as apathy and with contempt. She said nothing to me as she emptied her bags into the cupboards. Finally, I spoke. "Are you having an affair, Sophie?" She turned to face me, slightly blushing, but with no hesitation she replied, "I wouldn't call it an affair, darling." I was shocked and sickened by her admission, and yet waited silently in anticipation of her explanation of how screwing another man was not classed as an affair. "You are a wonderful man, Sam. You're a great provider, and you're my best friend. But there are things you can't provide me, and I'm not ashamed to say I want it all," she said bluntly and openly. "So that means you're cheating on me," I said, dismayed by her brazen approach to infidelity. "Only my body," she said, "not my heart or my mind, Sam. That belongs to you." My head was spinning and my stomach was in knots. The sheer, unabashed cheek of what she was saying left me speechless. "I never deny you sex, Sam, and all I'm doing is exploring with a couple of younger guys," she admitted. "What?" I screamed. I never raised my voice, and my reaction took her back. She walked around the table and took a seat opposite me. "Don't shout at me, Sam," she said, regaining her composure. "You admit to cheating on me with two guys, and I'm supposed to be quiet?" I replied. "I love you, Sam, but this is how things are going to be. Live with it, or I'll leave and be with him anyway," she said, issuing me both a threat and an ultimatum. I just sat looking at her. When her face softened, I thought for a minute she had seen the hurt in my face. "Everyone does it these days, Sam. My friends have had flings with younger men, and they say it makes the marriage better," she said. I was in shock. I was struggling to absorb it all before, but now Sophie was actually trying to justify her adultery by telling me all her friends were cheats too. As for the notion that it would make our marriage better, that was contemptuous at best. She did not care for the marriage or me, only the comfort and security I could provide. I spoke again. "So I can have another woman? Is that what you're saying, Sophie?" She looked at me for a few seconds and then laughed in my face. I sat in silence as she continued to laugh before trying to control herself. "You're right, Sam. Come on, be serious. You struggle to speak to women you have known for years. What chance are you going to have to chat someone else up?" She was openly mocking me, continuing to giggle, and I felt embarrassed and ashamed, but she refused to let up. "This is how it's going to be, Sam, so don't ruin a good thing. I'm still your wife, I still love you, and I still come home to you every night. Do not mess up your life by complaining about it or doing something you'll regret. She left me at the table contemplating what had just happened to my life, to my world. She was so open about her activities that I realized she did not care for me one little bit. I did not care if her friends were all cheating, but that did not give her the right to be one. Not only that, but she actually had the audacity to threaten me. I was angry, very angry. That night I slept in the spare room. I couldn't face being anywhere near her. But around midnight, Sophie woke me up and asked why I wasn't coming to bed. Was she really this deluded? I knew she was spoiled, but really? Oh, come on, Sam, get with it. This is the way the world works now. You're just acting like an old man, she said. I said nothing. I could sense her presence still on the landing, looking into the spare room. Oh, suit yourself, Sam. You'll come back to bed soon. I know you deny me nothing, and you know as well as I do I'll get my own way, she said confidently. In reality, she was right. What had I ever done in a 20-year relationship that suggested anything other than my unbridled loyalty and willingness to go along with everything she said and wanted? It was public knowledge that I was under her thumb and henpecked, and now it was well known amongst her friends and my work colleagues that I was a cuckold too. Next morning I went to my office. I took just a few steps in and was greeted by Ben, the man my wife was screwing. He smiled at me and asked, "How's your wife, Sam? Hope she is good." The smug look on his face, as though he was about to burst into laughter at any minute, just made my blood boil. I just looked at him and said nothing. I heard a few giggles by the coffee machine from grown men. I just looked at them as they stood their ground. I made my way past them as they continued to chuckle at my expense. I felt like the whole world knew my business, and even the boss's secretary, Jane, seemed to find my situation laughable and open to mockery. I walked into my office and sat at my desk. My day had started off in the worst possible way, and now I was a laughingstock at work as well as at home. I tried my best to focus on my project, but the anger within me refused to abate. I decided to start looking into my father. All I knew was that he was born in Vermont and left us at the age of 38 in 1983. So I searched for family history sites in that area. Within a few minutes, I discovered that there were 14 people named David Miller in Vermont who were born in 1945. I knew he might have died years before I went to university, so I was able to narrow it down to 3 possible people. I decided I did not have the time to go searching for each one, so I placed a message on genealogy websites in each of the towns I had found. As I sat in my office thinking about the last 24 hours, I was called by my boss, Mr. Wilson. He wanted to speak to me in his office. Now, Mr. Wilson was a successful and wealthy man, but at 60, he had been married 3 times. He was a cheater and a bully. He is one of those power-mad types who commands respect, but gives none in return. Many times in the past, I had thought about quitting, but he always convinced me to stay, and the money was the best in this area. One thing I didn't know about him was that he was screwing his secretary, Jane, behind his 3rd wife's back. "Now, I hear these rumors about your wife playing around on you, Sam," he said bluntly. "With your nephew," I snapped back. "Well, yes, he's a cad, that boy. It runs in the family," he said, laughing as I remained silent. "But that's what I want to talk to you about. I don't want this to affect the business, and family comes first after that, Sam. So if you have a problem, it will be you who will have to leave the company. Is that understood?" He was talking to me like an old school teacher punishing a child. I bit my lip as his eager secretary, Jane, hovered by the door. She was no doubt collecting some information to spread to her friends on the factory floor. As I turned to leave, I wondered why a young woman like her would lower herself to the depths of having sex with a dirty old man like Mr. Wilson. As I passed her, I heard snickering again. I put my head down and walked out. As the door closed behind me, I heard the explosive sound of laughter, which was obviously at my expense. As I made my way back to my office, I realized that being here was doing me no good at all. I had paid for my girl's education, and all I was doing now was financing my wife's infidelities. I was a pretty simple guy. I liked my gadgets, but I could live without the big house. The majority of my living costs were Sophie's indulgences, weekly hair and nail appointments, her car and phone, plus other unnecessary luxuries. At work, I was normally happy. It was my place to be creative, and I was very successful. I was the one who had designed many of the parts being produced and sold here, and I was sure I could find gainful employment elsewhere. They just thought I was too weak, and well, they were right. I wasn't the confrontational type, and I never made waves because I was content. I was good old Sam, the submissive engineer who people could walk all over. I looked at my screensaver of the family on holiday. I rolled the mouse and the page opened to my email. I had a message waiting for me, and it was from a woman named Linda Roberts from the Vermont Genealogy Committee. I was taken aback by how fast they had replied. I clicked and read the message. I was blown away. Linda had read my message appealing for information on my dad and had gotten in touch with a woman who claimed to be his niece. Her name was Sarah Johnson, and she was my cousin. I mailed back my number to Linda and asked if Sarah could possibly contact me. I left work with my spirits slightly raised. When I reached home, Sophie was cooking dinner, and as I walked in, she smiled and came up to me. I moved away and in a few minutes came back for dinner. "Can we talk about last night, Sam?" she asked meekly. "What's there to talk about? You made yourself perfectly clear last night. I either live with it or else, right?" She looked at me for a few seconds with what looked like regret in her face. It did not last for long as she inhaled deeply, cleared her throat, and continued. "You're a great husband and you've denied me nothing, so please don't deny me this, Sam." She was almost pleading. "If I'm so great, why cheat on me? Why make a fool of me?" I asked honestly. She became flustered and just shrugged me off. She had no answer. She was just selfish, and I was growing tired of it. I couldn't do any more to make her happy. The hours I put in to pay the bills and give her everything she wants, and I get nothing but disrespect and ridicule. I drive a 15-year-old SUV so she can drive one less than 3 years old. Look, Sam, I have needs, and you just cannot fulfill them. So you either deal with it like I know you're going to, or you lose me to a younger man. You mean Ben? You might as well use his name, Sophie. Everyone knows he's screwing you, I interjected. Okay, yes, Ben and I are lovers. He is effectively your boss, Sam, and hell one day take over the company from his uncle, she said bluntly. So he gives me what I need now in bed. And if you do not buck up and accept the arrangement, then I'll leave you, and hell give me everything else I want and need. I said nothing, as usual. I just got up from my seat and walked into my study. The tears came, and I wished to be anywhere else but here right now. I found a tissue and wiped my eyes as the phone began to ring. I picked it up and heard a strange voice on the other end. It was Sarah. We spoke for about an hour, and when I put the phone down, everything else was gone from my mind, and I had a huge smile on my face. Sarah was delighted that I had decided to look into my father and had so much to tell me. I found out that my mom had indeed kicked my father out of the house, so she lied to me all my childhood. He sadly died in 1987 when I was just 8. He had died of alcohol poisoning, and his mother, my grandmother, always blamed my mom for his character and state of mind after he left us. Sarah told me he longed to be back in my life, but was prevented from doing so. We arranged to meet at the weekend at her home in Vermont. I was excited, and I knew the break would do me good. The rest of the week dragged on. Things at home were the same, and at work, I was being constantly laughed at behind my back. Ben and his pals thought it would be funny to hang a pair of panties on my office door. I looked at Jane, and she said nothing. Inside the underwear was a post-it note that said, "Please return to your wife." I was broken. I sat at my desk and cried that day too. I wanted to blame everyone except myself. I would be glad when Saturday arrived. I told Sophie I was going to see a friend in Burlington, and she didn't really care what I was up to. I guess she would be screwing around on me, so being away made that easier for her. The drive up to Vermont was stressful. I eventually found Sarah's house an hour after I was expected. It did not seem to bother her as I was greeted with the best hug I had received in years. I was introduced to her husband, Mark, and their 2 young children, Lily and Sam. With the formalities over, we got down to talk about my father and my new family. Sarah had such a warm, selfless personality, and she and Mark talked over each other and finished each other's sentences. I guess they were both eager to share the story of our family. During my time there, we were joined by David and Emma Roberts. He was my cousin also, and brother of Sarah. We got on really well, and he added what he knew about my father and the family. After lunch, we went on a little trip where I was given time to reflect. When we returned, David and I spoke about our jobs and our family life. He could tell things were not good, and for some reason, I confided in both my new cousins. They simply told me not to stand for it and that they would support me if I needed anything. I was so grateful. I left Vermont with a new look on things. I had been told so many lies and had been treated so badly throughout my life that knowing I had a whole different family who within a day had shown me more kindness and honesty than most people I had known all my life gave me hope. I needed to sort my life out and get back to being happy, not just for me, but for my girls, my friends, and my new family. When I returned home, it was gone 8:00 p.m. Sophie was just getting ready to go out somewhere. "Where are you going, Sophie?" I asked. "Out with my friends." "Do you mean Ben or Jack?" I snapped back. She looked at me somewhat taken aback at how I knew the name of her second paramour. I gave her a knowing look. "Please, not all this again, Sam," she begged, seemingly indifferent to my feelings. "Please, Sophie, I'm asking you to stop this and be my wife. Stop being silly, Sam. I am your wife and always will be. Don't deny me my pleasures and I'll make life easy on you. I'll be back by midnight." She had completely ignored my wishes and continued to threaten me. She walked towards me with her arms open wide, so I turned my back on her. She said nothing of my blatant snub and just collected her designer handbag and headed for the door. "Again, Sophie, as your husband, I'm asking you not to do this," my voice now getting sterner. She stopped in her tracks and looked at me as though asking herself, "Who is this guy, and who does he think he is talking to me like that?" It lasted only a second again before she burst out laughing. "What are you going to do, Sam? Leave me? You never have the balls to do that. We both know you'll always be here for me." I was crestfallen. I dropped my head as her words reverberated through my head. For me, no balls. Deny me my pleasures. I always knew she was a spoiled brat. Her parents had seen to that. I knew I treated her like a queen, whereas I was the workhorse. I knew she was selfish, but always believed she loved me more than anything. I knew I was a fool, and I knew I had been for way too long. That had to end, and I needed to make plans to make it so. I wasted no time in getting things rolling. In fact, I started while she was out getting screwed by Ben or Jack. Maybe they were doing her together. That is probably what she meant by getting her pleasures, having her cake and eating it. I provide all the safety, security, and material goods, and two young guys get to have her any way they wanted. My thoughts were making me angry, and I was beginning to lose focus. I needed to find a way to destroy the last vestiges of affection I had left for her, and I think I found a way. I found the box I was looking for, and the specific picture within that box. It was the only one I had of my mom and sisters. I did not think it would work, but I cut a picture I had of Sophie's face and pasted it next to them. I had no love left for them, and adding Sophie's smirking face to the picture might just do the trick. I placed it on the desk next to the monitor in my study. At around 12:45 a.m., I was finishing up. I had pretty much worked out what I was going to do in the short term. I had an idea of when I would leave, but it could be a few weeks yet. I had the time because it was not like Sophie was expecting me to go. It might not work, and I would definitely require help to pull it off. But I had convinced myself by this time that I would go through with it. I heard someone stumbling through the door, and as I got up to look out of the window, I saw Ben's car pull away. I heard her climb the stairs, so I quickly wiped my history. In the future, I would have to use incognito mode. I waited until she went into our bedroom before going down the stairs to make myself a coffee. I sat on the sofa and pondered my future away from here, and to be honest, without my daughters being here, I knew it wouldn't be too bad. I thought I would try and move closer to them. Monday morning, I walked into work clear that I would not be lifting a finger anymore. Mr. Wilson could sack me for all I care. I walked to my office, oblivious to any of the snickering or comments being made about me. I managed to arrange a meeting with the bank for 10 p.m. and took the time before to work out my finances and preparation. It was going to be a long shot, but if it worked and the right people helped me, then I would come out of this pretty well. The meeting went as planned, and I was able to close out my savings account and remove my name from our joint account. I had an IRA with a few grand in it, so I closed it out for cash and stuffed it in my wallet. On the way back to the office, I stopped at a Best Buy and purchased 2 digital voice recorders, a 500 GB USB 3.0 hard drive, and a new PC hard drive. Once back in the office, I sat down and started to see if I could open up the company's private customer files. I had seen them briefly before in Mr. Wilson's office, so I knew they existed, but I needed his password. It took me no more than an hour to crack it. Ironically, his wife's name was the username, and the password was both his name and his 6-digit birthday, Wilson275961. I had what I needed. I attached the drive to my computer and downloaded all the files to it. 10 minutes later, I did the same with all my new plans and drawings for the energy-efficient hydraulic pump system I had been working on, which would keep this company ahead of the game. We built pumps for air conditioning units, heavy machinery, and even for the dairy sector. I wiped my entire PC history, including all the plans and all my work. I then shut it down and removed the hard drive and replaced it with the new one. I put everything into my bag and then reinstalled Windows. I spent the rest of the day looking up our competitors on my phone. I checked into Monster to look for engineering jobs in the South Boston area and then left for the day. That night, after another silent dinner, I headed for my study. I found that one of our main competitors, who had struggled during the financial downturn, was looking for a mechanical engineer who could assist in basic design and shop floor management. It wasn't entirely what I wanted, but damn near close. They were offering a salary $10,000 lower than my current salary, so I fired off an email and included my CV. I decided to sleep in our marital bed that night just to keep up appearances with Sophie. However, I made sure I was asleep when she walked in. I felt her rub up against me, and I felt sick. As bad as that was, it actually pleased me to react in such a way. I was becoming repulsed by her, and this would help me in the long run. The following day, I received a call from a very surprised-sounding Robert Smith from Harris Hydraulics. We spoke briefly, and he couldn't believe I would consider quitting Wilson Engineering for his smaller company. He nearly offered me the job on the spot, but I insisted on an interview the next day. He agreed. Another vital cog had been fitted, and the wheels were beginning to turn pretty fast. I had plenty of time on my hands, so I started to research apartments in the area. I found one. It was situated 15 minutes from the girls and 5 minutes from work. I arranged for a viewing the next day after the interview with Robert Smith was finished. Next, I spoke to Mr. Wilson and told him I had to go and see my daughters at Eastside the next day to sign some papers. He just brushed me off and said go. That night, I called my best friend, Jake. We had known each other since 6th form. We both got into Eastside, but he studied finance and mathematics. He was now a big-time banking analyst in the city and lived with his wife Sarah and children in a nice house in New York. Best of all, he and his wife loathed Sophie, which meant we rarely socialized with each other as couples. I arranged to meet Jake the next evening after my interview and apartment viewing. He knew I had something playing on my mind, but I told him I would tell all when we met. Before meeting Jake, I met my daughters and told them of the situation. To my surprise, they both were happy and displayed their frustration at their mother's behavior and pledged their faith and support in me. A day later, I met Jake and Sarah. I told them everything that had been going on and the first part of my plans. They were more surprised that I was fighting back than by Sophie's infidelity. To them, that was pretty much par for the course in their eyes. "So why leave her now, Sam?" Sarah asked, handing me another cup of tea. I told them all about the meeting with my cousins and the truth about my dad being kicked out of the house by my mom and how my sisters took her side. My dad was just like me, or shall I say I was like him, but this time my girls are on my side. "So it was that discovery that triggered you into finally standing up for yourself?" Jake asked, concern etched on his face. "No, I was taken to my father's grave. I was hesitant at first, but I managed to lay some flowers and say a few words. It was then I looked at the etching on the stone that left me shocked. It was then I knew I had to leave," I explained. "What was it, Sam?" they said in unison. It had an image of a rose, and below that it said, "In loving memory." It had the date of his birth, and below that it said the age he was when he died. There was a period of silence before I spoke again. He died at the age of 43, the age I am now. Both Jake and Sarah recoiled slightly at this news, and I knew that they understood. There have been times when I could have reached for the drink like he did or done myself in, like my grandmother believed he did. I had a choice: be like him or fight back. I decided I wasn't going to kill myself trying to be the perfect husband anymore and being abused and ridiculed in the process. I felt weaker at that point than I had in weeks. Admitting to my friends how low I had been was harder than I imagined. Jake shook me out of my mood. "What do you need from us, Sam?" "Please say no if it's too much, but I have a plan to protect myself and screw her over," Sarah interjected. I smiled and nodded. I guess Sarah did have a tough side to her character. When I thought she was having an affair in 2008, I opened a separate savings account and put all my bonuses and any spare cash into it. It was also with a stroke of luck that the only way we could get a mortgage for the amount we needed was if I applied in my name only. Sophie had no real work history, so it was just easier for me to apply alone. I knew if anyone was capable of following my train of thought, it would be Jake. I asked Jake to transfer the ownership of my house to a new company that he would create. I would pay off the mortgage. All I needed to do was contact the land registry and transfer the deeds into his company. Jake was skeptical. I told him that Sophie would have no money to fight the case, and her parents would not support her if they found out that she was sleeping around. They are religious and value their ethics more than their daughter. They agreed and even offered to help cover the mortgage and stated that I could pay later. On my way home, I went to the local Land Rover dealership. I knew the guy because it was where I purchased Sophie's Range Rover Sport about 11 months ago. I was still paying for it. In fact, I had an idea of how to get some more money. I told him that I wanted to exchange Sophie's car for the latest model. We came to an agreement that he would take the Range Rover back, and we would cancel our payment plan. I promised to return to upgrade my car, and he knew he could make up the cost of Sophie's car by selling it as practically brand new. I apologized for any inconvenience, but the thought of selling me an expensive new Range Rover more than made it up to him. On the way out, I took a 2017 brochure, not for me but for Sophie. When I got home, Sophie was sitting in the lounge nursing a coffee and looking a bit pale. I took off my jacket and threw my bag down onto the floor. I had to now work on the second part of the plan. I told Sophie that I still loved her and I wanted my wife to have the best of everything, so I'm going to trade her car in and buy her this, I said, pointing to a new 2018 model inside the brochure. "Oh wow, I love it," she said, oblivious to my plan. "You always know how to make me feel better, don't you, Sam? The only problem is that they have a buyer for your car already, so I need to get it down there by Friday afternoon. I'll finish work early and take it to the dealership, and then for the weekend, you can just use mine to go visit your lovers." The final comment made her recoil, and a look of shock and confusion filled her face. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing, Sam. I just thought you were still angry about our arrangement," she asked. "Not our arrangement, Sophie. Your arrangement. I had no say in it, remember?" "But I guess I have no choice, right?" I said, hoping to get a response. She just nodded as though she had finally put me in my place and I had conceded defeat. "I love you, Sam." I turned to look at her, and a genuine look of concern greeted me. I said nothing in reply and just walked off into the kitchen. My phone began to ring, and I walked out to the back garden to take it. Jake confirmed the money had been transferred. I was good to go. The next day, I wasted no time as I entered the bank and was shown into the mortgage specialist's office. An hour later, the mortgage was paid off and all my remaining accounts were closed. I walked a few doors down and opened a new account with another bank. I was a happy man knowing that I wouldn't have to pay anything again, and unless Sophie got a solicitor and took me to court, my smile faded. The next day, I contacted the land registry and filled out the appropriate online application. I had all the details of Jake and Sarah's new company, and within 10 minutes of applying, I was sent a confirmation email telling me it would take 3 to 5 days to complete. Once this was done, I would simply hand over the deeds to Jake, and he could register the property to his company. That same day, I knocked on Mr. Wilson's door. Jane was in there with him, of course. Fridays were usually the day the dirty old bastard had his way with her, and I think I disturbed their amorous activities. She left us alone. I placed my resignation down on his desk. He looked up at me with that stupid smirk on his face. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation," I replied. "I think it's best if I leave straight away. I'm sure with the situation regarding our families, I doubt you want me here too long." He looked dumbstruck. "I'd be grateful if you can get my P45 ready by Monday, and please don't mention this to anyone." "The wife doesn't know," I said brashly. "You can't do this. We need you," he said pathetically. "Not as much as you need your nephew, apparently. I'll be in on Monday to collect the last of my things." I pretended to drop a pin from my pocket, and when I bent down, I removed the digital recorder from my sock. I had managed to construct a pin to it, and as I stood back up, I hit record and pushed it up under the seat and into the wooden frame. "If that's all, Mr. Wilson, I have things to do." "Okay, Sam, but don't come crawling back when you're skint. Your money is the only thing keeping that cheating wife of yours with you. Do you realize that?" "Of course I know that, Mr. Wilson." "I wish my wife was as loyal as yours," I said, smiling. I knew that one hit him where it hurt. I turned and left his office. An hour later, I drove home and picked up Sophie's car and logbook. I drove to the dealership and dropped off her car. Thankfully, John Reeves offered to drive me home, and I gladly accepted. When I got home that night, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table with big red bags under her eyes. I knew she had been crying. I asked her what happened, and she reluctantly told me that she got gonorrhea. I laughed. Did I laugh? And she just glared at me. "Well, just take the drugs, and soon enough, you will be back on your back." Oops, I mean feet. If looks could kill, I would be dead already. I slept well that night for the first time in months. Of course, I slept in the spare room. Saturday morning, and I was feeling great. The good night's sleep definitely helped me, and I went into our bedroom and woke Sophie in bed to tell her I was going to give her some space to rest and recover. "You think I'm disgusting, don't you?" she said. I said nothing, and suddenly the tears began to flow down her cheeks. "I just want you to get better, that's all." "Oh, Sam, I do love you so much. I think I've messed up big time." At first I felt bad for her, but it disappeared even quicker than I thought it would. That shocked me a little. I realized then I had lost all love for the woman I have been married to for 22 years. Could it really disappear that quickly? Obviously it could, because I was done, and her situation did nothing to slow me down. I left the room after saying nothing. I got into my car and drove away happily. That night, I stayed with Jake and Sarah, who threw a dinner party with many of their friends and colleagues in attendance. When I arrived home late Sunday morning, I found Sophie up doing housework. I walked into the lounge, and when she saw me, she launched herself at me and hugged me. I just patted her on the back. She asked when her new car would arrive. "I can drop you off in town to meet your sister, and then you can ask her to drive you to the dealership. Then you get to drive back your new Range Rover," I said with an excited grin. She smiled and walked towards me with her arms open. I turned back to the kettle, pretending I didn't see her. For the rest of the day, Sophie was all around me, and I actually felt uncomfortable. She kept trying to kiss me or hug me, and I kept making excuses to leave. I think she got the message, because as I went to bed, I could see that she had been crying again. "Good night, Sophie. Will you be sleeping with me tonight, Sam? I want to cuddle up to you, and I want you to tell me everything will be okay." I felt nothing. "Not until you get the all clear from the doctor, Sophie." "Sorry, but you made your bed," I said harshly. "Well, when I get better, I'm sure I can find a man who wants to be in bed with me. I have plenty of lost time to make up for," she snapped back bitterly. I laughed to myself. It took longer than I expected, but here it was, and the bitch was back. All those regrets from Friday night had disappeared. For the last 22 years, I would have fallen for her, but this time, I ignored her tears and headed for the spare room. The last night in my house, and it will be in the spare room. I was also glad that she said those things. It removed any sign of any doubt I might have had. I looked at my mocked-up picture of her and my sisters, and all I could feel was hatred for her. She was only sweet when she wanted something and a bitch when she couldn't get it. I woke early Monday morning. Sophie was awake early too for her 8:30 hair appointment, so I drove her into town as planned. I drove off, knowing that could be the last time I ever see her. I somehow feared it wouldn't be, but it would for as long as I could make it so. On the way, I called the mobile phone company and terminated both our contracts. I pulled over into a lay-by to pay the penalty on my card. They informed me that the phones would remain in service until 5:00 p.m. Perfect. Next, I headed for the office to pick up my P45. I entered the factory, and there was a solemn atmosphere. News of my departure must have made the rounds, and for a brief moment, I saw a look of fear on their faces. I did not know why. As I walked down the corridor towards my office, I passed the coffee machine where the usual suspects were gathered. I wasn't exactly sure if Jack and Ben were aware that they were both screwing my wife or not, but here they were, both grinning at me and sharing jokes with the other morons. "Morning, guys," I said gleefully. "Good morning, Sam. How's the wife?" they said to the usual laughter. How this joke was still funny was beyond me. "Oh, not so good, I'm afraid," I replied. "One of you bozos gave her the clap." I walked away to complete silence, and when I turned back, their jaws had dropped, and Jack then yelled something at Ben. I heard a big commotion before heading up the stairs. Jane saw me approaching and gave me a half smile before putting her head down. Maybe now I was getting some respect. Mr. Wilson was soon at the door before I could knock. "I have what you want, so take it and get out." Maybe that respect thing was in my imagination. I entered his office and sat down. I reached under the chair and surreptitiously put the recorder into my pocket. I knew he would have given Jane his weekly Friday stuffing, and now I had it all on the recorder. "So, do you have another job lined up, Sam?" he snapped. I ignored him at first, but thought I would give him what he wanted. No, nothing. A big smile grew on his face, and he probably thought I would come crawling back to him soon enough. "So, do I get my final month's pay and end-of-year bonus now, Mr. Wilson?" I asked. He burst out laughing as Jane walked in with my P45. "What's so funny?" she asked. "Sam here just asked for his bonus and pay." "That's hilarious," Mr. Wilson said. Jane joined him in laughing at me. I thought, why not? So I joined in. This made them stop and look at me like I had gone mad. "Why are you laughing, Sam?" Jane asked. "I don't know, Jane. Why do you let this old bastard screw you every week?" I said as my laughter grew louder. They froze as her eyes grew wide, and Mr. Wilson began to turn red with anger. "I bet Mommy and Daddy are proud of their little daughter." She dropped my paperwork on the floor and ran out of the room in tears. "You bastard," Mr. Wilson said. "Get the hell out of my office and out of my company before I get the boys to drag you out by your ears." I laughed as I walked out and into my office to collect the last of my things. I was still laughing to myself as I pulled up to my house. I got out and dropped the back seats. I opened the boot and went inside the house. I walked around the house thinking about what I wanted to take with me. I had a few Romero Brito artworks, so I took them down and wrapped them in some plastic I had found in the garage. I packed them into my car and continued around the house collecting things. Finally, I went upstairs and emptied my wardrobe. I took all my paperwork from the safe, including the girls' birth certificates and my wedding certificate. I found a loft ladder and went up and found all my old stuff. My degree and the family photos were all up there. I went into the master bedroom and took all the jewelry I had bought Sophie over the years. It must have been over $15,000 worth. Then I took all the handbags, shoes, and expensive coats I had bought too. In fact, the whole damn wardrobe was purchased by me, so I took the lot. I was always the responsible one, so I had receipts for nearly everything for insurance purposes. It would serve me well when I came to sell it all. When I was done packing, I realized I would need a TV, so I took that too, along with my movie collection and the Blu-ray player, of course. By now, my car was way too full. I thought I could lose all of Sophie's clothes and a few more items I really didn't need, including some of my old clothes. I knew I would require a new wardrobe, and the girls would jump at the chance to help me out with that. I found all the best pictures of me and the girls and packed them into the car. I was in no real rush because Sophie wasn't going to be back until after 2:00 p.m. I made a cup of tea and took 5 minutes. Well, you have to have a cup of tea. It's in the Magna Carta, I think. I picked up my phone and called the TV company and canceled the satellite phone and internet. I called the gas and water companies to cancel the utilities. It would take a few days, but I did not care. I returned to the bedroom and sat on the bed when I noticed something that gave me an idea, one that scared even me. It was sat at the top of the wardrobe in a dusty old box. It was Sophie's wedding dress. She loved it probably more than me. I took it down and then found amongst the box of photographs on the bed our wedding album. I grabbed the duvet cover and snatched everything up and headed towards the garden. When I was outside, I walked to the middle of the garden and dumped everything into a pile. I added all of Sophie's clothes and her belongings that I knew I couldn't sell. I made sure I left her underwear alone because, well, I did not want to catch anything. I went in my car and closed all the doors up. I was ready to go, and looking at my watch, it was only 1:45 p.m. So I called up Robert Smith and told him I could drop off my P45 later that night with the night shift. That way, I could start work fresh tomorrow morning. He sounded delighted, and I told him I was already working on plans to win him new customers and improve the hydraulic pumps that would make him super competitive in the market. I think he could feel my enthusiasm, and I hoped as I ended the call that I had made his day. It was now 2:00 p.m., and I sat waiting for the call. I found some paint thinners in the garage and walked out into the garden and poured it all over the wedding dress. I was about to light the fire when my phone rang. "Hello," I said calmly. "What is going on, Sam?" Sophie screamed down the phone. "Whatever do you mean, Sophie?" I asked sarcastically. "Don't play dumb, Sam," she continued. "Calm down, Sophie. What's going on?" There was silence, and I could hear her breathing heavily. I could also hear what sounded like her sister in the background. "They told me you have not bought me a new car, but sold mine instead." "Oh yes, did I forget to tell you that?" I said. "What are you talking about, Sam? What's going on?" She started to sound panicked. "Well, from now on, if you want a car, you can pay for it yourself," I said, trying to remain as calm as I could. My heart was racing. "What?" she yelled. "I don't understand, Sam," she said meekly, and sounding very confused. "You heard me." "Just fine, Sophie. You want it, you can buy it. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to tidy up the kitchen. Is this some kind of sick joke?" I said nothing. "We will talk about this when I get home, Sam. I'm not happy about being pranked," she screamed again. I remained silent. I could hear her out of breath as though she was walking at pace to her sister's car. The slamming door confirmed it. I knew she was on her way. In her state, she could convince her sister to be here in 5 minutes. "Sam, Sam, Sam." "Yes," I replied almost too calmly. "Did you say you were in our kitchen?" she asked, suddenly realizing what I had said. "Yes, why are you not at work?" she asked. I said nothing. "Sam, Sam, Sam." She was now breathless, and I could hear the panic and confusion in her voice. I put the phone down as she continued screaming my name. I walked outside, struck a match, and lit the pile. Our past went up in flames as I walked away. I took our marriage certificate from my pocket, tore it into pieces, and left it on the kitchen table, along with a single photograph of us all on holiday in Disneyland. It was a great time with many happy memories. I wondered if she thought so too. I got into my car and drove away. As I got to the end of the street, I could see in my rearview mirror Sophie and her sister pulling up to the house. Neither of them looked up. They just ran into the house. I switched my phone off, smiled, and pulled away. I was in Burlington by 4:00 p.m. and decided I had time to visit a local phone shop and set up a new mobile phone contract. I also managed to catch the administration team at work to process my P45, and I met Freya, my new secretary. She was pretty young but held herself very professionally, a complete contrast to Jane. I made my way back to my new apartment, which was completely empty. I had running water and electricity, so I found the kettle I took from home and made a cup of tea. I moved my stuff in and ordered a pizza. I picked up my old phone and switched it on. The service had been terminated. I smiled to myself, knowing that Sophie was now without a phone too, and that should give the girls some breathing space before I get to speak to them. I found my sleeping bag and arranged it out in the lounge and waited for dinner. I had some furniture arriving at the weekend, but for now, I was at least glad to be away from Sophie. I switched on my laptop and located the voice recordings I made in Mr. Wilson's office. I uploaded the content and played it back to hear the incriminating evidence of his infidelity with Jane. I grabbed 2 USB sticks and made a couple of copies. I wrote the addresses of Margaret Wilson, wife of Mr. Wilson, and Peter Lewis, boyfriend of Jane, and then placed a stick into each one. I would post them tomorrow before work. Finally, I decided to call my daughter Emily to let her know the latest and not to let on to their mother where I was. To my surprise, she admitted that she hadn't even spoken to her mother yet. But of course, I guess she had no phone to be able to do that. In the week that followed, I managed to get my apartment furnished and wasted no time at work in contacting customers of Wilson Engineering and convincing them to switch to Harris Hydraulics. They saw what we were offering and jumped ship very quickly. A couple decided to stay with Mr. Wilson, but the majority hated the guy but tolerated him because of the superior products we offered. I knew it wouldn't take long for Mr. Wilson to find out why his business was losing customers, but I really did not care. I also knew that with all the utilities now cut off at my old home, Sophie would realize I was not coming back. There is no way she could afford the bills, so I knew it was safe for Jake to start the sales process. Sarah delighted in being the one to get the ball rolling, and by the end of the week, the signs were up. It was at this time I was contacted by Olivia. Apparently, Sophie had moved into her parents' house, and they were not happy that their little princess was a cheat. Sophie was after my blood, of course, and livid by what I had done to her. Strangely, I found that hugely satisfying but knew this was not the end to it. By the weekend, I was invited to another dinner party at Jake and Sarah's house. The dinner was a complete success, and I found myself completely relaxed for the first time since I planned to escape Sophie. Sunday morning brought good news. After only a week on the market, I had received 2 serious offers. I accepted one for $650,000 straight away. I knew it could be some time before it completed, but I made arrangements for the money. Once it was finalized, I would set up savings accounts in the girls' names and then ask Jake to spread the rest amongst numerous investment funds. I would also pay him back and take a chunk in cash to keep in my home safe. I still felt the need to protect myself. As another week passed, I was delighted to find out from Jake that the sale could be very quick. I contacted a removal company and instructed them to empty my old house. The girls called their mother and asked her if she wanted anything, and she was now even angrier and threatening. I promised the girls that it would soon all be over. On Tuesday morning, I was talking to one of our new clients who had been in a meeting with Mr. Wilson over a possible renewal of a supply contract. He had told Mr. Wilson that he would be moving to Harris Hydraulics, and Mr. Wilson was not surprised. He had found out that Wilson Engineering had to cut 50 of its staff due to loss of work. He also informed me that Mrs. Wilson was divorcing Mr. Wilson for adultery. I had absolutely no sympathy as I was totaling up the commission checks in my head whilst talking. I had no idea what happened to Jane and her boyfriend, but I knew he had gotten my gift if Mrs. Wilson had received hers. And even if he hadn't, I am sure it was well known why Mrs. Wilson was divorcing her husband. I wonder what her friends and family would think of her cheating with an old man. To reward me for all the new work, I was given a brand new Land Rover Discovery HSE. I was thinking of treating myself anyway, but Robert and the bosses were so pleased with me and the way the company was headed that I was given the car and a fair few thousand in commission. Well, it was actually more than 30,000. I was looking out of the window of my office, admiring my brand new car, when a familiar-looking Ford Focus pulled into the car park. I froze as I realized who it belonged to. It was Diane's car, Sophie's mom. I sat down at my chair and waited for the inevitable call. The phone began to ring and I picked up. "Mr. Smith, there's a woman here in reception claiming to be your wife. Freya," my secretary said. "Tell her I'm in a meeting, and I'll be down in an hour." 3 hours later, I peered out the window, and she was still sat there. I exhaled loudly and decided to leave for the night. If she saw me, then I would have to deal with it. If not, I would just drive on past. It was not like she knew what car to look out for. I left through a side door and made my way to my car. I was just getting into my car when I heard a screech of tires, and before I knew it, there she was, pulling up behind the car and blocking me in. She leapt out of the car and stormed up to me with a face like thunder. She looked like hell, and her clothes were obviously her sister's, as they were a little tight for her frame. Her eyes were all red and puffy, and she was crying as she spoke to me. "What did you do to me, Sam? Why are you treating me like this? I don't understand. I did nothing to you, Sophie." "You did this to yourself," I said calmly. "What about the girls? Don't you care about them?" she said. I felt my anger rising. "How dare you bring the girls into this? You have done nothing but hurt them all their lives with your selfishness and infidelity. I am done with you, Sophie. I have made that very clear. I saw the people in the offices looking out the window. This was embarrassing, and I needed to shut this down fast. Just leave me alone, Sophie. It is over. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Please, Sam, please, I'm begging you, she cried. For a second I felt pity, but I knew better. She would never change, and this was just another act to manipulate me. No, Sophie, it is over. You need to move on. I got into my car and she stood there looking defeated. As I drove away, she didn't even try to follow. She just stood there, crying. I felt a small pang of guilt, but it quickly faded as I thought of all the pain she had caused me. As I pulled into my new apartment complex, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. It was over. I was finally free. The divorce papers came through 2 months later. Sophie contested them initially, but eventually gave up when she realized she had no money and no support. The house sale completed smoothly, and I was able to set up savings accounts for the girls and invest the rest wisely. My life was finally back on track, and I felt happier and more content than I had in years. I still think about Sophie sometimes, but it is with a sense of relief that I am no longer tied to her. I have my freedom, my dignity, and the love and respect of my daughters. Life is good. Thanks for tuning into this shocking tale of betrayal and revenge. How would you handle discovering your spouse's infidelity? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories. See you in the next video.